What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Underground Genius. It's been a minute. Yeah, I'm aware that it's definitely been some months since I've last updated this podcast. To give you just a brief summary of what's been going on, I've been working from home these last couple months, as I'm pretty sure a lot of you have been. And I'll be honest, it's been hard to kind of create that separation between work and life, considering the type of work that I do, how physically and mentally taxing it could be. And I let that get in the way of a lot of the things that I was neglecting a lot of the things in my personal life, this podcast included. Thankfully, I was able to get some of that passion and ambition back, and couple that with the fact that as of this recording, I'll no longer be working from home. So that's not even going to be a factor in my dealings, especially with this podcast. So my intention is to be consistent with this, but of course, only time will tell. So if you're a new listener, welcome. I really hope that you appreciate and enjoy the content. And if you're an old listener, good looks. I appreciate you rocking out with me, your patience and understanding and all that. So shout out to you. So what I was doing, of course, in the time between the last episode and preparing for this episode and just moving forward, was I was watching and listening to all of the previous episodes that I've recorded. You know, just things that I could tweak, things that I've noticed, things that work well, things that aren't, et cetera, et cetera. And in listening to the first couple episodes, specifically episodes 2 through 4, if you remember, if you've heard those episodes, those were the episodes where I talked about notable hip hop groups that have never released a project. If you haven't heard it, I definitely recommend checking it out before listening to this episode. So at the end of the 4th episode, I actually made a realization that the group that inspired me to actually research that topic, I completely forgot to cover. I was fascinated with this group so much so that I just basically decided to see if there were other groups out there that shared a similar story. And I feel like it was a blessing in disguise because I feel this group needed its own episode. So without further ado, I present to you Cocaine 80s.
See it goes, but don't approach it, isn't me. I'm holding on, but girl, I'm close, you're killing me. Oh my love, being yours just like a kiss is bittersweet. I'm living, but my heart still says in memory of your love, girl. I'm 6 feet over.
To be honest, I always compare the story of Cocaine 80s to, think of any time you've seen something, you started something, and you're watching it as it grows and develops, and you're excited because you see the potential and you see a very high ceiling. And then over time, as the content or whatever it is that you're looking at develops and gets released, you start to become a little bit, confused, maybe disappointed, or even frustrated. That's how I always view Cocaine 80s. And I'll get into the why because of that. One of the easiest things that I can compare it to is back in a time in 2013 during the NBA Finals, there was a commercial that aired. In that commercial, Jay-Z was in the studio with a couple people. He was in the studio with Pharrell, Rick Rubin, Timbaland, and Swiss Beats, among other people. And in the commercial, Hov was detailing the vision and purpose behind his forthcoming album, what would, of course, be Magna Carta Holy Grail. And you couple just that session with those industry titans, with Hov's genius marketing strategy with Samsung. And I just always recall this cultural shift that occurred afterwards. You know, the thinking was that these were 5 of the genre's greatest creators, 5 of hip-hop's greatest creators across all generations. Naturally, the album to end all albums, a masterpiece, was upon us. But of course, once Magna Carta hit shelves and streaming services alike, it wasn't necessarily met with the widespread acclaim that session and just that moment in hip hop warranted. A lot of people place it in Hov's lower half of his catalog. And it's been a minute since I've heard that project, but I remember doing the same thing. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't necessarily his greatest work. But just whenever I watch that commercial, I get those same chills. It's like, damn, like this shit was really happening. Like this is about to be something. Now, I say all that to say that this group, while they're not necessarily of the same stature, and by this group, I mean Cocaine 80s, while they're not necessarily the same star power exists within the group, that same feeling of great hype and anticipation followed by a response that doesn't necessarily meet the talent that exists. That's kind of the same thing when I look at Cocaine 80s. So what is Cocaine 80s? Cocaine 80s was a special creative experiment within the hip hop space. It was comprised of several popular and in-demand figures in the music industry. And if I wanted to, I could do a profile on each individual member. And that's kind of a testament to the talent and reach that existed in the group. Of course, Cocaine 80s, if you're in the know, was the brainchild of megastar producer No ID. He is to Cocaine 80s as Professor X is to the X-Men. And No ID is not just a story producer with credits for Hov and Nas, just to name a few, but he served as the president of Kanye West's label Good Music until 2011, and he also served as the executive vice president of A&R at Def Jam. This was also where he distributed his own record label, RDM Records. And then after that, he was named the executive vice president of Capitol Music Group. So he's been around. He knows what he's doing. And of course, aside from famously taking on the role of mentor for both Kanye West and J. Cole, No ID also signed several acts to record labels, furthering their own careers. Think Snow Allegra, think Janae Aiko, think Vince Staples, think Logic, just to name a few. But back to Cocaine 80s. If we're talking about the members of the group, the starting point would always be James Fonlroy. And you could actually view him, and a lot of people view him as the face or the leader of the group. He was definitely the lead vocalist of the group and always the first person to be thought of, just because of the fact that whenever you hear a song, for the most part, it's James Fonlroy singing. So who is James Fonlroy? He is a highly respected singer amongst his musical peers. He's also won a Grammy, and he's a top-tier songwriter whose articulatory prowess has transcended genre. And what I mean by that is his collaboration and writing credits include Chris Cornell, Chris Brown, and Catherine McPhee. He's also a frequent Rihanna, Justin Timberlake, and Bruno Mars collaborator. Other members include Girl Wonder. She also has several high-profile writing credits for those like Beyonce and Rihanna as well. You have mixing engineer Rob Kinelski, who serves as the lead engineer for Billie Eilish's team. Going back to vocalists, you have Common, who has been No ID's longtime creative partner in crime for decades at this point, and is also a fixture in the city of Chicago. Janae Aiko, I mentioned her earlier, but she was also a part of this group. She came in a little bit later, but she was also a full-fledged member of Cocaine 80s. You have Kevin Randolph, who was a Grammy-nominated producer and songwriter who has worked with Logic closely throughout his career. And there are a whole bunch of others, Steve Wireman, and a whole bunch of others, just to name a few. But that's just, it just shows how big this group was. And every time they were talked about in, like, let's say blogs, for example, like all of these or a lot of these members, even if they weren't vocalists, a lot of them were mentioned with the group, just to kind of emphasize the immense talent that existed. Now, as for the name of the group, Cocaine 80s, No ID said in LA Weekly interview, quote, cocaine just means dope or good, however you want to use that metaphor. For me, the 80s was great because you had Boy George, Michael Jackson, Stevie Wonder, happy belated, by the way, Prince, and Cyndi Lauper. No one puts boxes saying this is urban, this is popular, this is underground. It was just good or bad. My entire approach is built on the idea that things can be commercial and artistic. He continued by saying, quote, it's written from a real songwriting perspective, not caring about genre, and finding a way to fit into the current climate without compromising its intention. So the goal of Cocaine 80s was, of course, creating outside of the confines of genre.
Baby, I love you, but you get on my fucking nerves. Acting like you don't know you got exactly what you deserve. But you are more than that. Like the scar of age written all on my face. The war is still raging inside of me. I still feel the chill as I reveal my shame to you. I wear it like a tattoo. I wear it like a tattoo.
Like a fly Ass Pisces, someone who will never let you go.
So I wanted to get into the members of the group before I got into a timeline, just to highlight the amount of talent. Like, these were no novices at all in Cocaine 80s. And that's why it created, especially for those in the know, it created this great sense of hype and just interest in this group, because to have all of these individuals come together and make something, it's just you want to see what's going on. You want to be informed and know what's going on with the group. So as far as the timeline goes, we'll start in June of 2011. Seemingly out of nowhere, an EP titled The Pursuit by Cocaine 80s was released on online digital platforms. At that time, think of live mixtapes, think of DatPiff, just mainly mixtape websites. Now, the only thing that was known about Cocaine 80s at that time was that it was a project that was presented by No ID, who tapped Common, Fonlroy, Wireman, Kinelsky, Girl Wonder, Kevin Randolph. So he tapped all of these individuals and just put it out to the world with no warning or anything of the sort. Now, that was in 2011. Later that year, No ID would launch RDM Records, as I said, which was distributed through Def Jam. Now, in the years that followed, they released 3 more EPs. Ghost Lady, which was also released in 2011. Express OG, which came out in 2012. And finally, and perhaps their most well-known project, The Flower of Life, which was released in 2013. This was also when Janae Aiko was added to the group and when she made her first appearance. Now, in between the EPs, there were several features, including on Aiko's debut project, her major label debut. There was also a feature on Nas's Life is Good album, the deluxe version. There's a feature on Hit Boy's HS87 compilation project, on Common's album, his 10th studio album, Nobody's Smiling, and lastly on Good Music's Cruel Summer compilation. They were also featured on a Mikey Halstead song titled Pain. And fun fact, this is actually something that I learned while doing the research for this topic. Halstead, he was originally signed, he's from Chicago, and he was originally signed to Kanye West in the late 90s. And in a DJ booth interview, he actually revealed that Kanye was originally supposed to sign under Cash Money, but he opted to sign for Rockefeller Records because Cash Money was quote unquote too street, which is weird considering the fact when you look at Rockefeller Records, you have, not to mention Hove, but you have Memphis Bleak, you have Freeway, you have Beans, you have a lot of these people who are also who kind of exemplified that street persona or that street feel in hip hop, but I digress. All right, so to recap or to go back, this group was one that I looked at as a group with no commercial project out. And as we've discussed, or as I've talked about, they had 4 EPs out and they had a bunch of features. So why are we here? I'll get into that. The first reason being, the most important reason, none of these EPs can be found through conventional means other than YouTube. So if you were to look at a streaming service like Apple Music, Spotify, Tidal, etc., you're not able to find any of these projects. And even if you were to go to like SoundCloud, you're able to get a couple of them, but not all of them. And when I made the episodes 2 through 4, and when I made that list, the criteria for a project was basically any body of work that you can find on these streaming services. And I say that now just because of the fact that whenever you're trying to put someone onto music, whenever you're looking to listen to an album, for the most part, you're gonna go to one of those places to stream it. So that's reason number one. The second reason why I wanted to do this case study of sorts is that I feel they were under-marketed and underutilized. Outside of those EPs and those features, not much is really known about them. They don't have any music videos of their own. They definitely don't have any interviews. They have no concerts to speak of. Just the only thing that you can find were just typical blog posts like on Complex, or like Hot New Hip Hop or something like that. But just nothing that gives a full profile of who they were as a group, which is fine. And one thing to note is it's not like there was no activity or no plans for the group. Shortly after taking his position at Def Jam No ID, he actually had a plan to package all 4 of the EPs and to release it as one commercial project titled Hermes Trismegistus. I don't know if that's Greek or Roman, but my pronunciation on that has never been the best, so my apologies. That was supposed to come out in 2015. And in 2016, he teased a new project from the group. And that's pretty much it. Since then, we haven't heard any new rumblings, nothing new from the group, no new songs or anything like that. And one of the things that occurs frequently now is, remember I said Fonlroy's looked at as the face of the group. So whenever he comes on social media, especially like Instagram Live or anything of this sort, he's always looked at as the person, because a lot of people, believe it or not, they're still looking for new Cocaine 80s music. And he's the person that they go to, as opposed to like a Common or a Janae or anything like that. It's kind of like Punch with TDE. A lot of people hound him for new TDE material and shit. And that perfectly ties into my observations when it comes to James Fonlroy, whom I believe to be a talented vocalist and songwriter. But in that same vein, I feel like he's gotten in the way of more visibility on him as an artist or just any of his dealings. He's known for like harmonies that's layered on top of J. Cole songs, Justin Timberlake songs, Drake songs, Kendrick, Rihanna songs, etc. The list goes on. But when we're talking about mainstream, Even he was on as recent as DJ Khaled's project. He was on the song "Sorry Not Sorry," which gained a lot of media hype just because it was a Nas and Jay-Z collaboration. You know that's gonna do numbers. And he was on the hook, but he wasn't in the video. And the video itself, side note, I'll probably talk on that at another time, but I was confused as to the purpose of the video, but that's neither here nor there. But when we're talking about James Fonlroy and we're talking about For the Masses, he has no song himself that you can point to like, yo, or a bunch of people can reference like, yo, this is a great Fonlroy song. It's usually his features that a lot of people point to. And he doesn't even have an album out either. He doesn't have a body of work that me as a Fonlroy fan can, if I'm looking to put somebody onto his music, can say, yo, go listen to this project top to down as a masterpiece or whatever the case may be. He has he has an extensive catalog that's out on SoundCloud, but that's about it. And aside from that, his social media posts are few and far between. So not much is really known about him. He doesn't really do too many interviews either. One thing I will say about him, though, is that he and a couple of others run 1500 Sound Academy, which is, and that's out in LA, which is a school of sorts. And they're basically imparting knowledge to the future generation of music creators and music leaders. So shout out to him for that. Like, I definitely commend him for that. With an art form such as ours, to preserve the integrity and the fidelity of our art form, I feel like it's imperative to have these hubs, these creative hubs, to make sure that traditions and practices and things like that, teachings, are passed down to the future generation. Like, so shout out to him and shout out to all of the individuals involved in 1500 Sound Academy. And in addition to that, like I said, he's respected and he's basically respected by his musical peers. Those in the know, as far as like James Fonlroy's talent and his artistic abilities, those in the know, they know, like, yeah, they know how he gives it up. But as a fan, I just wish that he would do more. I want to see more. I always want to see people that I believe to be superstar talents or capable of taking their career to the next level, so to speak. I always want to see them do more as opposed to like hit a ceiling that may not necessarily exist. And I say all that to say, I'm not aware, or I'm not necessarily, I don't know what his musical aims are. I'll just put it like that. But at the same time, I don't need to know what his aims are in music to enjoy his music. And I'm not entitled to know that. And if that's part of his process for creation and giving like the content that I love, then fuck it. Then I'll eat that. Fonlroy, I'm pretty sure he's made a name for himself, but I'm pretty sure he's made a lot of money on his path. But there's always going to be that longing for me to see more and want more. And with that, I just look to the future to see what he's going to come out with, what he'll do next, if there is new Cocaine 80s music to be put out. And I'm not putting any of that on him, because getting to this also speaks to something I was talking about in episodes 2 through 4. Getting all of that, like getting that music out when you have all of those collaborators out, that could just be a bureaucratic nightmare. So it's just like, yeah, I'm good on what they've collectively provided for the masses. So shout out to them. And with that, I feel like we're good. I feel like this is a good place to cut this episode off. I definitely recommend checking out all of their work. The Flower of Life, in my humble opinion, is their most polished. Of course, it was their last entry. I think it's their most polished work. So if even if you didn't want to listen to all 4 EPs, I definitely encourage you to check that one out for sure. And with that, thank you again for listening. I appreciate it. Shout out to y'all. My hope is to get this next episode out by next week. But let's see. Only time will tell. But shout out to you for rocking with me. And with that, it's been a pleasure, y'all. Peace.
And that's a part of my design. Maybe all my dreams are lucid. Been in control the whole time. You're living through nightmares. You pretend to smile. You forget you're pretending high as fuck and you don't wanna come down. Well, baby, then don't, let's get higher. When the weed's gone and you're still high, you could be going out your mind, oh.